So I create a new class inside the project known as test car. Okay, now you can create the objects of the car class outside the class as well. Say you have this car class over here, and you can create the object of this car class outside inside this class as well, inside the test car. Okay, so inside the test car I just declare one main function. Okay, and I create the object of the car class as new car. Okay, so this is the object of the car class. Like we know, if I write car A is equal to new car, okay, so A out here is the reference to that object, right? A is the reference to the object. Like we know this, if this is the object of the car class, then A is the reference to that object. A is pointing towards this object. Okay, similarly you can have as many objects of the car class inside the class. Say you have these objects of the class and this is pointing, and B is pointing towards this object, and toward this object C is pointing towards this object. Fine, so I can create more objects of the car class. Say car B is equal to new car, and car C is equal to new car. Okay, now we'll see the references. Okay, we'll look into details about what are references. Okay, now if I write over here a dot model, okay, now I just declare this model as public, and so that it can be accessed outside the class as well. Fine, and similarly I just declare it. Okay, now if I call in this model, these properties of the car class in outside the class, a dot model is equal to, I write say A, and I write b dot model is equal to B, and similarly C dot model is equal to C. Okay, and then I just console the output. Console dot write line a dot model, B dot model, and similarly C dot model. Fine, and I write console dot read key. Okay, and then when I run my code, I just comment this line. Now I'll just put now in order to comment multiple lines, you just comment it like this. Okay, in order to comment the multiple lines of code, just press this. Okay, so this is how you can just comment multiple lines of code with the you put a slash, asterisk sign, and asterisk slash sign. Okay, now when I run my code over here, you see that it prints A, B, and C. Right, it will print the respective models of the car class. Okay, now here comes a little dicey thing over here. If suppose I write A is equal to B, B is equal to C, and C is equal to A. Okay, now what this will do, what modification will it do? I will just look into it with the help of the diagram. Okay, now as we know that these three are the objects of the car class. Okay, this is A is pointing towards first object, then B, and this is the third object, C is pointing towards the third object. Okay, now when I write A is equal to B, okay, so now A's reference will be removed from this object, and it will now point towards the location where B is pointing. So now A will also start pointing towards where B is pointing, that is at here. It will now A will be pointing at this location. right? So the next statement is B is equal to C. Okay, now when I write B is equal to C, now B will be removed from its current location and it will move towards the location where C is pointing. So now B will start pointing towards where C is pointing. Okay, so now B will be pointing at this location towards the third object. Okay, so next is C is equal to A. Now when C is equal to A, C will be removed to its current location, from its current location, and it will move towards the location where A is pointing. That is, since A is pointing at this location, so C will also point towards this location C. Okay, and okay, so this is what it means. And after that, if I print all these the same thing, so now what will happen is that now what would be the output? A dot model, since A is pointing towards this object, so A dot model would print B, then B dot model would print C, and C dot model would print B, since C is also pointing towards the second object. So the output would be B, C and B. Fine. Now when let's just see, when we run our code, so it prints B, C and B. Okay, that means object remains constant in the memory at a particular location, but object references keep on changing. Object references keep on changing, but the object remains constant at a particular location. Okay, so out here, this A, since this object has got no object reference, reference, so it cannot be accessed. It will be destroyed by C# by a mechanism called garbage collection. Since it cannot be accessed, so it will be destroyed. Why? To keep the memory occupied if it is not accessible. Right? So this is a very simple example of object reference. Fine. Okay, and similarly, if we write A dot model is equal to x something, any value, and okay, and then I just console the same thing out here as well. Okay, and when I run my code again, so now it prints xx for the first A dot model, and then for the C dot model as well, it prints the same x 4 times. Okay, so that means that if object is there in the memory and it's got more than one reference inside it, it's got more than one reference associated with it which it can, and if any one of the reference changes the value inside the object, then the value is updated for all the references. It would be updated for all the references. Fine. So this is the concept of object references, difference between object and object references. So now we'll move to the another concept of the what is call by value and call by reference. Fine. So I create a new class known as point. Okay, and inside this point class I declare two variable x and y. Okay, so these two variables x and y, it denotes the x and y coordinates of the point class. Okay, and I declare a function inside the class inside the point class car. Okay, public static void swap. Okay, and this function, it accepts two arguments, int a and int b. Okay, and similarly and I make one main function as well, public static void main. Okay, and I write console.readKey. Okay, so now what this swap function will do, it will swap the values of the two integer variables a and b. Okay, that is whatever value you are sending into a would go inside b, and the value which you are sending into b would go inside a. Okay, so inside this main function I just declare the object. I'll just create the object of the point class. Okay, and I declare the variables p.x is equal to 10 and p.y is equal to 20. Okay, and then I write p.x and p.y. Okay, and then I call the swap function and I pass on the values p.x and p.y. Okay, and inside the swap function I write int temp is equal to 8. Okay, I just stored the a into a temporary variable temp, and then I replace a with b and then equate b to temporary variable. Okay, so through this logic the value of a and b would be swapped. Okay, and then at the end I just print the values as p.x and p.y. Okay, so now over here I expect that the swap would be a success out here. Okay, I expect that the swap would be a successful. So when I run my code, I'll just comment this main function of the test car class. Okay, and now when I run my code, out here you see that swap is not successful, it is unsuccessful. X remains 10 and y remains 20. Okay, the concept is very simple out here. Okay, so out here what you are doing is that you are passing p.x into a p.x into a and p.y into b. Right, so what we are actually doing is that we have created the object of the car class, right, and inside this object we have two variables x and y. Okay, and p is pointing towards this object, right? We have given the reference of the point class p. Okay, so basically what I am doing is that I am creating a memory space a out here. Okay, and similarly a memory space b. Okay, and x is passed into a and y is passed into b, and then swapping is done between a and b. Right, so then x and y remains same. When you are swapping, a and b values are swapped, but p.x and p.y it remains same. So when you are printing the p.x and p.y, so this is the reason why swap is not done. Actually the swapping is happening between a and b. X and y are remaining the same at their location, they are not changing their value. Right, so this is the reason why swapping is not done. So you have to swap the values of x and y. X and y's values have to be swapped, not the values of a and b. Fine, so we'll make a new function, public static void say swap values, and inside it I will pass the object reference of the point class. Okay, and then inside it I write temp is equal to t.x, then t.x is equal to t.y and t.y is equal to temp. Okay, so I'm just storing the t.x into a temporary variable, then replacing the value of t.x by t.y, and then changing the t.y variable into storing it inside the temporary variable again. Okay, so this logic will help us swap the values of the x and y. Okay, and then inside the main function we can just call in this function swap values. Okay, and I will pass on the reference of the point class, that is p. Okay, so basically I'm just keeping both the functions as static function. It is because since the main function is a static function, so we will not find any difficulty executing these functions. Okay, so I'm just keeping both the functions as static functions. Okay, so coming back to the swap concept, so I just called in this swap value function and just passed on the reference of the point class, the object reference of the point class p. Okay, so this is the basic difference between the swap and the swap value function. Okay, this swap function, in this we are passing the values, and inside this function we are passing the object reference p into t. Okay, so what would happen inside the memory is that this is the object of the point class. Okay, and p is pointing towards this object. Now since we have created another reference t which is pointing towards the t class, so now t will also point towards the same object. Okay, and then with the help of the t reference I am swapping the variables, swapping the values of x and y. Okay, so after this we can just write console.writeLine p.x and p.y. Okay, and then when we run our code, you see that the values, it gets swapped. Okay, 20 is stored at the first location and then 10 is stored at the second location. At the third time the swap is done. Okay, it is because the t reference changes the values of x and y, and then p gets the updated value. Okay, since the t reference, it changes the values of x and y, and then the p it gets the updated values of the x and y variables. Okay, so this is the difference between the call by value and the call by reference. This function out here, swap integer a integer b, is the example of the pass by value. It is the example of the pass by value. Mainly primitive data types like byte, integer, character are pass by value, and this function out here is the example of the pass by reference. Okay, objects are always passed by reference. Okay, so you can pass the object reference into the functions as well as the input parameters. Okay, so we have seen the local variable, global variable, meaning of static, how to create the objects, difference between object and object references, object pass by value and pass by reference. So now we'll move to another concept, one more concept of constructors, which is very important thing inside programming. Okay, so I create a new class known as constructor. Okay, and I just declare it public. Okay, and I make one main function. And I write console.readKey over here. Okay, now inside this main function we will create three objects of the car class. Okay, say I write car A is equal to new car. Similarly, car B is equal to new car, and car C is equal to new car. Okay, so when you are initializing the three objects of the car class, then you have to initialize all the properties of the car class. That is, a dot model is equal to, say, BMW, then b dot or we can initialize every properties of the car class. A dot price is equal to price for the class for the car. Then we have another property as a, okay, we have the next property as a wheels property. Okay, so then similarly you have to initialize the properties of the B class, B car as well, b dot model, and similarly for the third class as well. Now suppose you've got, instead of 2 properties, there are 10 properties of the object. Okay, so whenever you are creating an object, you will have to write 10 different lines, so it becomes a overhead for me that you create object and write separate lines to initialize the properties inside the object. Okay, so that's why we use constructors. We use constructor. Now in the car class, I'll just declare one constructor as public. We'll make one constructor as public car, and inside it I pass on the variables string m and int p. Okay, so now what is a constructor? What is a constructor? Constructor is something which is having the same name as that of the class. It has the same name as that of the class. Okay, now this will look similar to a function, but it is not a function. It has got no static, no void, no return type. It has got nothing associated with it, just the name of the constructor that is the same as that of the class name. Okay, so over here you can see that the car has got its constructor. This car class has got its constructor, which takes 2 parameters as m, one string variable and another one as integer variable. Okay, and then I write model is equal to m, and I write price is equal to p. Okay, so I will just tell you why I am doing this. You'll get to know in some time. Okay, now when you create a constructor over here, and I just uncomment this. Now when you create a constructor over here, you will start getting an error inside the main function. Okay, so what I will do is that I'll just comment out this constructor for the time being and just explain you what is happening. Okay, so now we'll make another constructor that will take no arguments with it. Okay, so I make another function public car. Okay, so now when you create another function that takes no arguments, and now you are not getting any error inside the main function. Since this car constructor, it has no arguments associated with it. Okay, and inside this constructor, say I write in car constructor no arguments. Okay, and then inside the main function I am creating 2 objects of the car class. Okay, so whenever you are calling new car, you are actually calling this constructor of the car class. It calls this constructor. So as soon as this the object of the car is created, it will automatically call this constructor of the car class. Okay, so now when we run this code, I'll just comment this. Okay, and then when we run this code, okay, this main function also, okay, and now we run it again. So now you see that in the output it prints 2 times. In car constructor no arguments, in car constructor no arguments. So it will print 2 times since we are creating 2 objects of the car class. So it will call, for the first time it will call this constructor, and when you are creating the second object, then again it will call this constructor of the car class and is printing in car constructor no arguments 2 times. Okay, so this is how you can call the constructor. Now similarly we can make a constructor with different arguments as well. We can make a constructor. Okay, so I uncomment this. So this concept is known as overloading. This concept is known as overloading, that is same name but different arguments. Okay, it can also be done with functions as well. Fine. So constructor is different from a class. It has got no return types, no static associated with it, nothing. It is different from a class. So what is the role of constructor? Constructor will help you initialize the objects. You don't have to write c1.model, c1.price and these unnecessarily things again and again. We'll tell you how you can just access those properties as well. Fine. So inside the constructor class, just uncomment this and I'll comment out this part. Okay, and inside the constructor class I create one more object of the car class, d is equal to new car. Okay, and inside this object I pass on the values as say Hyundai and I give on the price of the car. Okay, so now this car constructor, since we have created the constructor of the car class which takes 2 arguments, so when you are creating the object of the car class over here, so at this time it will call this constructor of the car class which takes 2 arguments. Okay, so okay, and then when you are creating this object, when you are creating the object of the car class like this, car A is equal to new car, so now this object will actually call this constructor of the car class which is pointing to default constructor with no arguments. Okay, so then after this you can simply write console.writeLine d.model and similarly we write d.price. Okay, and then when we run our code, so here you see that it prints the model and the price of the D class, D car. Okay, and then you can see over here that it just prints 3 times in car constructor no arguments. Okay, it prints 3 times in car constructor. It is called 3 times. It is because since you are calling this car constructor 3 times, you are creating the object of the car class with, and this car is actually pointing towards the default constructor which takes in no arguments. So that is why this in car constructor no arguments is being called 3 times, since you are creating 3 objects of the car class inside the constructor. Okay, so this is how. So now we'll create the object of the car class and initialize the non-static variables as at the same time, and in Selenium as well we'll be making the constructors as well. we'll be making the object of the classes which are predefined. Okay, and now inside this constructor, if suppose instead of m I write model and I write price, okay, and then over here I write model and price. Okay, so out here this model and this price are the local variables model and the local variable price. Okay, but on the left hand side, this model and this price is actually the global variable model and the global variable price. Okay, so now when you run your code, so over here you see that it doesn't print anything. For the first time it prints a blank, and for the second it is printing a 0 value. Okay, it is because here the C# thinks that what you are doing, that just equate the local variable with the local variable model and local variable price to the local variable price. The global variable never comes into picture. So here local variable is hiding the global variable because name of both the variables are same. Okay, so in this case we can write this dot model is equal to model, and similarly this dot price is equal to price. Okay, now what is this? This is a keyword which will always point to the current object, whichever object is calling the constructor. Okay, so this is how you can call. When you call it, when we run it again, so now you see that it prints the model and the price of the car. Right, so this is all about the simple fundamentals of the object oriented programming. Okay, so we are done with the object oriented programming concepts. I had told you local variable, global variable, static, non-static, object reference, object and object references, constructor. Fine, so now we'll tell you just a small example of how objects are used in Selenium. Okay, so now I'll just make one new project. Now whatever I'm doing right now, don't try to follow it very sincerely. Okay, say I make one sample Selenium project. Okay, and inside this project I will configure Selenium into it. Okay, I'll just add the references of the WebDriver classes. Okay, now how to configure the Selenium will teach you later on in the coming classes. Okay, don't just take tension. So I'm just taking a simple, just creating a sample project of the Selenium with the help of Selenium. Okay, so I'm just including the classes, the WebDriver classes, which will have the Selenium references. Okay, so it has got added and we close it, and now I'll just make a small Selenium program which will open the browser and will take you to a particular website. Fine, so inside this main function I create the object of the Firefox driver class. Dr is equal to new Firefox driver, and I include the corresponding namespace for this, that is openqa.selenium.firefox. Okay, so this, as you can see, that this Firefox driver class is an inbuilt class inside Selenium which we have just accessed it. Okay, so I just wrote Firefox driver is equal to new Firefox driver. So out here you know what is this line meaning. You are just creating the object of the Firefox driver class. Okay, so this dr represents the object of the Firefox driver class. And now when we just run our code right now, you will see that a blank Firefox browser will open up. Okay, so here you see that a blank Firefox browser opens up. We have just created the object of the Firefox class and a blank Firefox browser opens up. And now inside this object, this dr is the object of the Firefox driver class, and with this object you can call any you can see a lot of non-static functions that are associated with this object of the Firefox driver class. You can call any one of them according to your requirement. Okay, so we will look into this in more details in the coming classes, as we will be studying about in the course as well. Okay, so say suppose I call in this function, that is driver.url is equal to, and I give the specific URL. Say I write google.com. Okay, so this will navigate the URL to the google.com website. It will navigate the browser to the Google website. Okay, so this is where C# is important. You know what this line means. Firefox driver dr is equal to new Firefox driver. What this line is doing? This line is creating the object of the Firefox driver class. Okay, and after that you are just redirecting the browser to this particular website with the help of the URL function. Okay, and now when you run your code, you will see that your browser, it will be navigated to the google.com website. Okay, so it takes you to the google.com website. Okay, so this Firefox driver class is inside the Selenium. Now similarly, the Firefox driver class, we have the class for the Chrome driver as well. Similarly, there is a class for Internet Explorer driver, for Safari driver. Everything we have inside the Selenium. We will be discussing about all these in the coming classes. Okay, we'll look into it in more details. I just gave you a small hint that how this happens inside Selenium. Okay, so that's all for the third module. We have done with the third module. Fine.